Welcome back to Mean Streets, where each week we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And today's case is 1963's From Russia with Love, starring Sean Connery, Robert Shaw, and Lotte Lenya. Directed by Terence Young. The IMDb logline for From Russia with Love is James Bond willingly falls into an assassination plot involving a naive Russian beauty in order to retrieve a Soviet encryption device that was stolen by the organization Spectre. I'm very excited about this episode because we also have some special guests with us today. Sometimes over here on Mean Streets, we stumble upon a case that just goes beyond the pay grade of us two cinematic sleuths. So today we started poking around in the dark and got the attention of some spooks. So I'm thrilled to have SpyHards with us today. Scott, Cam, welcome to Mean Streets.
Thank you for having us. And it's a thrill to be found in the dark because, frankly, that's where Cam and I like to hide.
That sounds very suggestive, but I'm looking forward to finding out who the special guests are.
Well, Daniel Craig. No. No, I'm thrilled to chat From Rush with Love. This is like one of those. It's a film I like to call spy noir because it's post classic noir, but there's so much. There's a lot of noir elements to the Bond books and to some of the early Bond films and some of the latter ones that I think this is a really kind of good. It's a good middle ground between spy and noir fiction to kind of sink our teeth into. But before we dive into the story, I am curious about how everyone sort of came to Bond, and if you can remember your first impressions of From Russia with Love. Should we start with Cam?
Okay, so my introduction to Bond came, I think, like many people, through a father. That's the way it is for so many. And my dad, I was at my sister's soccer game, said, okay, tonight, kids, we're ordering in pizza and watching a James Bond film. And my dad loved Roger Moore. And so he was very excited to show us Roger Moore's greatest Bond film, A View to a Kill. Yeah. So we had a free trial of Super Channel, which in Canada is basically the equivalent of HBO. And so we had, this 1 week trial. A View to a Kill was on there. I was very excited. I was probably like 10 years old, and I didn't really know what James Bond was, except there had been an Archie parody called James Denob. And so like I knew it was something kind of cool. And so watched the movie, absolutely loved it, and proceeded to, with my sister as well, rent several Roger Moore Bond films. So we watched Moonraker, The Spy Who Loved Me, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy. And then it was like, I love these. Wait, there's another actor that played Bond, and they're going to be showing one of those other movies on TV. I better tape it. And that movie was From Russia with Love. And it bored me to death.
Oh no.
So
end of episode.
Yeah, that's the opinion of a like 10 or 11-year-old. I came around on the movie over time, but jumping off of kind of the the campy fun of the Roger Moore era, watching like Connery in From Russia with Love was like a real adjustment. And it was a movie that I think maybe speaks a little more to the mature Bond fan than like the kid. But yeah, that was sort of my introduction to the movie, and probably a little different than some of the other ones you'll hear.
I love that. Scott, what was yours?
Well, I need to sort of dive back a second because I hadn't heard the whole backstory with Cam's dad and The View to a Kill. I mean, is he also a big fan of quiche?
Not that I can think of. I don't think we've ever had quiche in my house, but my dad is a Roger Moore guy. Like, there's other Bonds, but none of them are as good as Roger Moore in his eyes.
Interesting.
Well, I can understand why he may also be your favorite, but that's for a good discussion for another day, Cam. But as for myself, it's a tough one because anyone growing up in the UK listening to this will understand this, but we were all shown Bond films on bank holidays, and they were just on. It was basically on ITV, and it was just there. And I do not know which Bond film I saw first. I do not know which at which point I saw From Russia with Love, but I'm fairly certain I did witness it in the space between being born in 87 to around about 1997 when I started remember going to the theater. And that first film I definitely remember seeing in the cinema is Tomorrow Never Dies. I have distinct memories of driving out of Uxbridge Shopping Centre, my parents driving, and I pretend to drive the car in the back after seeing the film. A very adorable memory that I'm sure you're all smiling about whilst listening. And so, yeah, I can't say I have any recollection of watching From Russia with Love, only that I did know there were multiple James Bonds, and I was already sort of well accustomed to that by the time I saw Tomorrow Never Dies.
Nice. Matt?
I was sort of amalgamation of Cam and Scott, to be honest, because my first Bond was Roger Moore, being a child of the 70s and the 80s. And I can't remember what the first Bond film I saw was, but I know it will have been a Roger Moore because that was what I thought Bond was. And I went then to the books. And the first book I read was Live and Let Die. And I remember thinking, even when I was sort of 12, 13, this isn't the film I saw. You know, these books are something quite different. So I then went on like a phase of reading the books rather than watching the films. And then as time went on, Scott is absolutely right. Growing up in the UK, every Christmas, every bank holiday, there was a Bond film on. It was taken for granted almost. Mm-hmm. So I can't remember when I saw From Russia with Love for the first time either, but I guess it will have been one of those bank holidays. And as they've both just said, you know, you learn as time goes on that there were multiple actors that played him. And so you go in with a sense of trepidation that you're not going to get what you think Bond is, you know. But I'd already sort of had a taste of that by reading the original books. So by the time I got to Sean Connery, I thought, well, Bond is just whatever you make him in whichever film or book you're reading at the time. So I can't remember watching From Russia with Love for the first time, not vividly. But I suspect, as Cam says, I thought, oh, this is a bit dull compared to everything that Roger Moore was doing. But older and wiser as you become, your opinion changes, and it changed dramatically for this film.
Yeah, I probably, like everyone else, can't remember the first time I watched it, but what I do remember is Sean Connery being the first Bond I watched. In the States, in the mid-90s, there's a network called TNT. I don't know if it's still on or not. Maybe it is. But they used to do 15 days of 007. And for 15 days, they would play every single Bond film that was out at that time. And weirdly, like Dr. No was always quite elusive. I would always miss that, and I would always miss On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But I would always seem to be catching From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and You Only Live Twice. And then a bunch of Roger Moores that I would start to watch, find them horribly campy, and would stop.
Oh, that hurts.
So I never.
You were born at the wrong time, Luke. That's why.
I know.
I knew I liked you, Luke. I knew I liked you.
I just never took to more. I'm sorry, but there was just something. I think when I would watch those early Connery movies, I would get a sense of there is a sort of a Hitchcockian vibe to the style of them, and I loved a lot of early Hitchcock. Like growing up, To Catch a Thief was one of my favorite films. I loved, like as a little kid, I loved watching that film, and there's some connective tissue there. So I think that was probably part of it. But I always loved From Russia with Love. That and Thunderball were my two favorites growing up. But yeah, so I've always had this sort of love for the early Bond films more than the ones that came after. That doesn't mean I don't like the ones that came after. I do. But I've always, From Russia with Love has always been up there for me. Do you guys get dive into the books with Bond very much? Are you what's your opinion on, if we look at From Russia with Love now and think of literary Bond versus cinematic Bond, how do you I don't know, compare the two, or is there any sense in doing that?
I mean, I will put my hands up and say I've never completed the series. I've read, at this point, most of the Bond books, but I'm not the most avid of readers. This is why, unlike the two of you behind me, is movie posters and not books. So I have made the time to read them, but I think it, like, I don't think when we look at films on SpyHards, we go, oh, this is a bad adaptation of a book, because I think it's a different medium altogether. And as long as you can make a solid story in a film, I don't think it really matters if it's, close to the source material or not. So for me, I think they're just two separate things altogether. So we tend to stay away from books because Cam and I are afraid of them.
That's right. Yeah. I've read about half of the books, but I have read From Russia with Love, which is a fantastic book.
Yeah.
It's, I guess, at a point though where the movies are a little closer in adaptation, because Dr. No and From Russia with Love are fairly close. Although with From Russia with Love, Bond doesn't even enter until about the halfway point of the book. You get like half of the book is just the setup of the Spectre plot, or Smersh in the case of the book, and then the second half is Bond wandering into that trap and seeing how it plays out.
Yeah.
But it really is like when you get to the third one, Goldfinger, where they go, well, hold on, we can push this in different directions. We can go a little more comic booky. We can have a little more fun. And that's where the books like really start to separate from the movies. But in terms of like From Russia with Love, I think it's one of the few where it actually in some ways helps to talk about the book, because they are quite close. And it is an actual adaptation that feels like it's trying to do proper service to, Ian Fleming's work.
Yeah, I agree with Cam on that 100%. I think this is a very clever adaptation of the book. And by that, I mean, if you adapt a book too slavishly into a film, it can become, or into a dramatic presentation of any kind, it can become boring, and it can become tedious because they are different medium. So what you have to do is take the essence of the book and stay as close as you can to the spirit of it and to the plot line of it. And I think that's what this film does. I used to be really sort of adamant that what's the point of adapting a book into a film if you're not going to do it properly? It's one of my bugbears. But particularly with Bond, that opinion is diluted over the last few years, because I think now that film Bond is so its own thing, book Bond is its own thing, that it's become impossible to talk about the two of them sort of together. So after these initial early films, which are quite good adaptations of the books, they just start using elements and titles, so that they do become over time much more divorced from each other. And now I think it's pointless discussing a Bond film now with reference to books that were written in the 1950s.
Yeah, unless it's Casino Royale, maybe.
It's
apart from Casino
Royale.
Royale.
Well, but they are still taking things from the books. You've got the Poison Garden in No Time to Die is from You Only Live Twice, I think. The book.
You Only Live Twice, yeah. There are still snippets of it, but Bond. But it just strikes me that now the Bond franchise as a movie franchise is its own entity. And what they do with it now is perfectly legitimate. Whichever direction they take it in now is perfectly legitimate, because the books will always be there for people who want Bond as he was originally presented.
Yeah,
that's really my take on that.
And the precedence of the franchise to go so wildly different to the books it's the standard now. So no one is sort of expecting it to be, what Fleming did. I think what always interested me with Bond is the question of is he a hero or is he not a hero? And this is kind of why another reason why I really enjoy From Russia with Love is it's Ian Fleming described Bond as a blunt instrument. He had a really it's an interesting conversation with Raymond Chandler, who wrote the Philip Marlowe mysteries. Raymond Chandler is not far off from his final days, and he's clearly drunk in the interview, and it's quite sad to hear. But there's this really interesting back and forth between them, and Fleming is quite honest, and he's like, well, Philip Marlowe is a proper hero, whereas James Bond, he's just a blunt instrument for the British government. He's not really. He didn't write him to be a hero, and I think you kind of get a glimpse of that or a vibe of that in From Russia with Love, because he Connery later becomes more sort of action hero, like what you sort of expect from a film of that status. But I do think he's a bit more. There's maybe a slight more coldness to him, a little bit in From Rush with Love. But what's your guys' take on Bond as hero or blunt instrument? And is that something that do we see enough of that in this film, or could there be more, or just in general in the franchise?
I do think we see it here, especially in the dealings with Red Grant, where you have the fight there. When you move forward in the franchise, Roger Moore is going to throw quips and raise an eyebrow and dispatch a villain in a fun, lighthearted way. Whereas, like, what you see with Connor here is he looks great. Like, he looks impeccable. It's a sex symbol when he shows up early in the movie, in the kissing in the boat with Sylvia Trench. But later on, when you actually see him uncoiled fighting with Red Grant, that is the weapon coming out. It's brutal, it's vicious, it's visceral, and he kills him, unceremoniously, and puts his suit back on and continues on with the mission. But you kind of see like the animalistic side of Bond come out in moments, and it feels like he's more contained. When you get to like Goldfinger, which is a very good movie, some could say the best of the Connery films when you look at it in terms of its, the highs it hits, you don't have that same feel. When he was learning to become Bond, it was like moving like a panther. Yeah. And you get that sense in both Dr. No and From Russia with Love. And I think that kind of he moves away from that kind of mold in Goldfinger and Thunderball.
Yeah, you mentioned the fight with Grant, and I love that. I love that bit because there's a moment after he's killed Grant that there's a blatant moment where he could have made a quip, but he doesn't. And I remember watching, because I rewatched it obviously for this, and I was thinking, does he say something? And when he didn't, I was like, oh, they had restraint back then. Oh, I'm glad for that, because it conveys a different kind of Bond. And I like the cold Bond, and I think because we were talking about the way the franchise in cinema evolves, it's sort of warped people's understanding of what and who Bond is as a character. And I mean, it's fine as it is now, and it can go back and forth of being campy Roger Moore stuff to overly serious Daniel Craig stuff now. But I just sort of I just sort of feel that it is kind of important for audiences to maybe understand that Bond isn't, even the creator of Bond didn't see him as a hero. He's very much an instrument. He's very much a damaged, and he's just a very damaged individual. That's not someone you're meant to be looking up to. And no. And that's something that I feel with this film, and I love the way Connery portrays Bond in this, because he when he's mad, when he gets mad at Tanya, and he thinks she's double crossing him, and he's pretty rough, and it's not nice, and you're like, oh crap, this is meant to be my hero, and he's not being very heroic right now, but that's because he's a killing machine. And I think people maybe sort of forget as the franchise moves on. I think that sort of gets forgotten here.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, Fleming's Bond doesn't quip. There's almost no humor in the books at all. Very little of it. And if there is, it comes from other characters. It seldom comes from Bond himself. So in Dr. No and in this, Connery is very close to what Fleming puts on the page. There's a little bit more humor with Connery's performance, but you're right. I mean, that some of the expressions Connery has, facial expressions, when he thinks that Tanya's lied to him, and also when Rosa Kleb's got him cornered, the anger on his face is palpable, and it's done, certainly at the end, it's done in close up, and you can see it. He's absolutely seething in both those scenes. And all the time Connery's looking at Robert Shaw, saying there's something not right about you, and I can't put my finger on it. And that is then carried through that whole sequence on the train until that confrontation, which is, for my money, is one of the best in the whole Bond franchise. That fight is one of the best fight sequences in all of the films for me. Really, it's good.
I was going to say even like a bigger moment, like the explosion with the boats where he fires the flare gun. There's like a lethal efficiency to how he does that they would not do in the future. Like they would have made it a bigger moment where Bond kind of acknowledges what he's just done. But in that moment, he's so focused, he knows what he has to do, and he just does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And he looks in danger in that when he's on his knees in front of Red Grant, he looks in danger. He looks as if he knows this could be the end. Because I'm not convinced he's got a plan. When he's first confronted by Grant, I don't think he's got a plan at all. And he's on his knees with his hands in his pockets and a gun in his face. Now Roger Moore would be taking that in his stride, wouldn't he? But Connery sort of really looks on edge, and you can see he's desperately thinking about how to get out of it. And when he asks for the cigarette, I think that's just buying time. I don't think that's a ploy at all. I don't think he's thought of saying I'll pay for it until later, until the split second later, and then he thinks, canister.
Mm-hmm.
I can perhaps use that. And I love that because what it does is make Bond a believable human being, unlike the Superman that he becomes later on.
I don't disagree. One of the things I found interesting about my rewatch of From Russia with Love was I'm always a big fan of the title sequences, and I don't know about you guys, but I love the change up to the Bond theme for From Russia with Love, and it's kind of a bummer that they don't ever really go back to that, where there's that like da 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 da. Like I effing love that. Like I listen to that all the time, and it's a shame that in general I think the franchise has kind of not ever revisited that particular motif. But I also found it interesting that even at this point in the franchise, we're still not quite doing the songs yet. They don't actually play From Russia with Love during the opening titles. But by Goldfinger that all comes in. They're still sort of finding their feet with that. But what was your guys' take? Do you have any thoughts on this particular pre-title sequence of the belly dancer who is later one of the belly dancers in the in the camp later in the film? The actress that they project the stuff on.
Oh, I was just trying to put that together. Is that Martin Bestwick? Is that?
I can't remember which one it is, but it is one of the. It's the belly dancer in the little camp is the same one as the
people listening. I've got it wrong, probably. Please don't write at me. I am not the guy that keeps these sort of things. I am not IMDb. Thank you very much. Thoughts on the pre-titles? Well, I guess it is a pre-title sequence before they really discovered what they were doing. I think the only thing that jumped out to me is, like you say, is sort of the lack of the classic Bond motif of the pre-title sequence in terms of the music. We just did a deep dive into the music of Bond a couple of weeks ago on the show, and there's one thing that jumped out to us is obviously in those first two films, Dr. No From Russia with Love, they haven't really found the formula. They'll go on to find it in Goldfinger. But I don't think the film suffers for it. I think From Russia with Love still has a really powerful opening, and I think they just turn that up to 11, if you will, in Goldfinger.
Yeah, and actually, Maurice Binder, who did the pre-credits for a lot of the classic Bond films, didn't do From Russia with Love. So when you look at those opening titles, it was actually Robert Brownjohn, which is maybe why it feels a little different than what you're going to get, especially with Goldfinger in the next film.
Yeah, I agree with that. I quite like the fact that it's less sort of operatic, if you like, and that it's much lower key. One of the things I've always liked about the Bond franchise is that when it gets too big, it feels it has to go back down to earth, to a certain extent. So, you only live twice, and then you have to come right back down to earth with Honor Majesties, and the same with Moonraker, To For Your Eyes Only, and all that business. And looking back, these earlier films, before they've really found their stride, there's just like a rough charm to them that I think really works, and it's part of the reason why we wanted to do these early films for our show, innit, Luke? That they are grittier than the sort of super spy films that come later, and that follows through. And I like the fact they've not found their feet quite, and that there's something very basic about these films in terms of the formula, and they're still trying to work out what works and what they can do next, And I think, as an opening title sequence, I don't think it's necessarily that far away from what you would normally get. I think it's in the spirit of the Morris Binders. I didn't know, actually, Cam, that it wasn't Morris Binder. I didn't know it was somebody else. But yeah, I'd take that point that it's another fella's take on it. But it's not so different that it jars with me. And it doesn't go on for too long either, which is always a good thing for me. I just want to get into it, and get going. So yeah, I don't dislike this opening sequence at all. I think it works quite well for the film that we're about to watch.
Yeah, and also From Russia with Love kind of sets up the as you say the franchise is still finding its feet, but this really sets up the kind of the pre-title sequence, the thing that is the big exciting opening that then every single Bond film afterwards will imitate, and that is we see Bond sneaking into onto these grounds, and we don't know what's going on, and then Bond is killed. You're like, oh my god, they killed Bond straight away. But then they do the Mission Impossible face mask, which technically came before Mission Impossible. So again, don't write at me either.
Sorry, I was just emailing you about that. Actually, I was just wrong.
Mission Impossible actually came out in 1966.
I think you'll find.
But I love this opening sequence. I like the shock of it. I like the mask. It's actually quite. It's a funny behind the scenes. And initially, when Terence Young shot this scene, the guy that they had under the mask apparently looked just like Sean Connery. So when they watched it back, they were like, "This looks just like Sean Connery." They had to get a different guy. So the guy you see in the film is a very different looking guy with a mustache, so that the audience know this is definitely not Sean Connery dead. We haven't killed Bond straight away. But it also sets up a motif that you see quite a bit. Like, how many times does Bond die in the opening title sequences in other films? Like at least 4 or 5 times.
You only live twice. I mean,
Skyfall.
Skyfall, yeah.
Skyfall, yeah. It's not in the opening titles, but there is like a Bond dying thing in Diamonds Are Forever, but that's earlier in the movie.
Yeah. Thunderball, kind of.
Yeah, there's a funeral, the JB funeral. Yeah.
It makes you think it's Bond, and then it's not. Yeah.
Are you saying the Bond films repeat themselves sometimes? No. Blasphemer.
Oh dear. But yeah, no. So I it's interesting what you can kind of take away from the opening of Thunderball and see how the franchise moves on and adapts and reuses a lot of this stuff.
I think I'll just jump in as well. It actually speaks to something you were talking about earlier as well, in the sense of obviously Bond would go on to be a bit more of an action hero, Superman-esque, larger than life character, whereas Dr. No from Russia with Love, he's much closer to what. I mean, I don't think there was any spies doing this in the 1960s particularly, but closer to what a real-life spy would actually get up to. By the time you get to Goldfinger and, irradiating all the gold in Fort Knox, it becomes a bit more science fiction, or science fact, as Cubby Broccoli would like to say. So, I think it all tracks in that sense, because it is a bit more of a grounded opener for a more grounded version of Bond. And I always say about this film, this is the only Connery film, apart from maybe Dr. No, that I could see Timothy Dalton in, and it works perfectly.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And I like, being a sort of crime, coming from these things from a crime writing perspective, I like the fact that certainly in Dr. No, Bond is pretty much a detective in this. He's pretty much a private eye. And he's doing private eye stuff more than he is spying. Roger Moore makes the old quip, doesn't he, that Bond is the worst spy in the world because everyone knows who he is. But in these films, he's quite separate to that. He's quite apart from that cliche that he becomes later on, arguably. And that's because these, they're still new at this point. They're still raw at this point. These films. And Bond is serving perhaps a different function in this, in that he is trying to, certainly in Dr. No, solve a mystery. This is much more an espionage thriller than a detective story. But it works just as well. So you get both sides in these two films. You get both sides of Bond. For me. But I prefer this, like I said, this grounded, more grounded, more gritty representation of this character before it becomes all guns, gadgets, and girls. You know, that even the gadget is more grounded in reality. I mean, again, I don't think many 60s spies had briefcases like it, but we know that knives in shoes and, you know, tape recorders and things in shoes were a thing.
The attaché case with the knife and stuff did exist with the gas.
That existed as well. Right,
that's
right.
What the doubloons I've not seen, but I've seen a briefcase that had the gas if it was tampered with and a knife in it, if I remember correctly. Mm. That's about it.
So I mean, I think that's all to the film's bonus. You know, also the film's credit.
You're also speaking a little bit to a problem that me and Cam often find on the show is we will, because obviously our goal is to review every spy movie ever made, which is a lofty goal. And yet sometimes we find ourselves wandering into corridors where we're looking at detectives or hitmen.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how these things can blend.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, Fleming and Chandler, Luke was mentioning the interview with Fleming and Chandler before, they were great friends. And they sort of saw themselves, broadly speaking, as writing similar types of stories, didn't they? Didn't they, Luke? So, yeah, you know, and Chandler thought that Fleming was the best thriller writer that Britain had, you know, and worlds away from what British crime writing was at the time, which it still was Agatha Christie, you know. So Fleming's writing is a lot closer to what the Americans were doing in terms of trying to show people who kill in a realistic way for realistic reasons. And that's part of the reason why there is that crossover, I think, that between noir fiction and certainly Bond. I'm not so sure about espionage fiction per se, but certainly Bond.
Well, if you ever read like one of the books where Bond kills someone, because in the movies, everyone remembers the way Bond kills the bad guy. Like they're usually kind of big and over the top. But when you actually read how Ian Fleming describes Bond killing an enemy in the book, it is so much more stripped down. And there's usually like a comment on sort of the thin line between life and death that Bond acknowledges. It is not I think he got the point kind of moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is like a character who's world weary, who sees, you know, his adversary is dead, but knows he himself could die at any moment as well.
Yeah. And one of the books, I'm not sure it isn't Goldfinger, starts with him getting wasted in Miami airport, you know, trying to drown the pain of he's just killed a man on a mission.
That's right. That's Goldfinger.
He's trying to drown it, you know. So it is, and it's you're right, guys. It's the act of killing, but also the way he feels afterwards. Whereas too often that is a quip, you know, and a throwaway line and a gag.
Yeah, and you look at in this one when he kills Red Grant, there is kind of that moment of relaxation or whatever, or coming down from that high. Whereas, like, look at a scene that was very much modeled on that in Spectre, where you have Bond going up against Mr. Hinks. It's a big, overblown Hinks getting yanked out of that train, and we just keep barreling forward in the movie. There's not that kind of moment of Bond recognizing what he just went through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was something I really appreciated in Casino Royale, is they at least have that moment with that Craig gets that one moment where he sits in the shower with Vesper. And I like that Bond returned to that with Casino Royale, but sort of very quickly went away from that. But yeah, I know what you mean with that scene where he does come down after that fight. I love that, and this is why I think I gravitate more towards Connery's early Bond the most, is kind of, as Matt was saying, is there was a strong similarity between the American gumshoe and what Bond is doing. They're both loners working, you know, being paid by billionaires to solve problems, right? Mm-hmm. And often it's at their expense, you know, to their health, their safety, their life. And so I think this is kind of why this early Bond, cinematic Bond, fits so well into that sort of, I almost want to say like early neo-noir vibes, because it's still playing with a lot of ideas, a lot of, you know, things like the femme fatale. Although From Russia with Love doesn't really have a classic femme fatale, but it does have a pretty cool femme fatale.
I think it depends on what you're into, I'd say.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
I quite like Russian ladies in uniform personally, but that's just my taste.
Although I don't think she's interested in you, judging from the
she
movie.
might not. It might not be reciprocated.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very true. That is true.
Certainly not in the book. In the book,
Cam,
it's far,
I got the
far
point,
more
Cam.
overt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we talk Kleb? I think we should. I think the elephant at the room is Kleb. And I don't know about you guys, but I find this character, and I've always found this character fascinating because from watching the film, she seems like she's probably a lesbian. I get the vibe. She's sort of running her fingers over Tanya's back and touching her knee and making her feel very, very uncomfortable. There is a sort of
there's no doubt about
aggression.
it in the book.
Say again.
No.
There's no doubt about it in the book.
Yeah.
Although it could be more ambiguous sexuality, but in that moment she wants control, and so is doing that. Like we don't necessarily know.
No.
You can write that whole thing off, and I've seen people go through jump mental loops just to do it online and say something along the lines of it's part of her like Spectre training or her Russia training that she intimidates people by doing this sort of stuff and uses her sexuality to intimidate. And it's like, I think she just likes girls, folks. But,
Yeah, I think she just likes girls.
Because the only person she intimidates in that way is Tanya. That's it. No one else does she do that with. When she goes and meets Robert Shaw, what does she do? She just punches him in the gut.
Yeah, and just before that, Walter Gatell touches her on the arm, and she sort of recoils in undisguised disgust. I think we're on the right lines, gents.
I think so. So then I guess the question is the film doing a service or disservice by having its gay representation be the villain? It's the 60s. It probably doesn't matter.
I mean, that's like every movie of like
I know
for decades, like the villains often have this kind of queer coding going on, because a movie that this movie is pulling a lot from. Bond was famous for taking trends and running with them. We've mentioned something like Moonraker is obviously a response to Star Wars and Close Encounters. This movie is very much jumping off of North by Northwest, which was a massive hit by Hitchcock. And that movie has Martin Landau in it as the henchman, saying things like, "It's my women's intuition," when he's cluing in on Cary Grant. So it's like the queer coding is very prominent in villains. Is it a good thing? No, but it's also like kind of comes with the territory with this type of material in this era.
Yeah. And Joel Cairo, I mean, the Maltese Falcon,
sure,
he's 20 years before this, pretty much.
And then look at you're going to go to Diamonds Are Forever a few years later, where you have two openly gay henchmen in Winton Kid, but you also have Blofeld dressing in drag. Whereas like they are like, Bond is the most heterosexual man who ever lived. It's like, yeah.
There's also Ian Fleming's disdain for lesbians in the books. It's quite obvious, and I think that a little bit of that does jump through into this.
Yeah, and it is disdain.
Yeah.
Ian Fleming had a very particular mindset, which is very, very obvious when you read the books.
Yes, regarding many things.
Regarding many things. But I think it's Rosa Klebb is the principal villain in this film, isn't she?
Yeah,
that's a tough one. There's always that debate. Is it her? Yeah. Is it like Kronstein because he's the one that comes up with the plan? I would agree with you though. Like Rosa Klebb definitely is the one. Obviously in billing, she's the top billed. Yeah. But also she's the one who's there by the end as the mastermind.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand the argument for Kronstein, definitely, because he's on the. But she's the active villain, isn't she? She's the one that's. He's dreamt up the plot and the plan, and she's the one carrying it out. So I think I'd err on the side of Klebb being the principal villain, which to have a female main character as the villain, I think that is more important than what the sexuality is, perhaps.
Yeah, and the next time they would do this would be really 1999.
Yeah,
Sophie Marceau's character, Electra King. Like, there's a massive gap, like a 30+ year gap. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't realize that was the next. And I love both of them. Those two are my favorite cinematic Bond villains.
And then they wouldn't do it again until 2015 when Lea Seydoux turned up and everyone got really angry for some reason.
Ooh.
and then caused Bond to die in the following film, allegedly. So, I mean, that's your third female Bond villain.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a bit angry today, apparently, folks. I'm coming in hot.
Coming in hot. This is we'll refrain from no time to die discussions. We'll refrain as much as possible. But no, you mentioned an interesting point a while ago, Cam, that in terms of like Bond building off other things and Hitchcock being one of those things. And I mean, the end fight scene there's a blatant riff off of North by Northwest with the helicopter chase.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exactly the same, like shot for shot almost kind of imitation of what was going on there. But it works. I think the Bond franchise always, I think you guys have talked about this on your podcast, I think the Bond franchise always does really well to take what is happening and throw it into its recipe and make it work for Bond. And in a way that doesn't make it feel cheap. Like, I don't watch that scene where Bond is running away from the helicopter and think, oh, this is just North by Northwest. This is Bond doing North by Northwest, and it's really fun.
Well, it's also calling back to like the 39 Steps where there is a chopper chase through the Highlands and it swoops down and goes to take out Robert Donat. It's also kind of the same shot. I mean, that's Hitchcock doing Hitchcock again. So that's, he's riffing on himself and just obviously had more money. North by Northwest was kind of like the synthesis of all of his spy movies up to that point. But yeah, the whole melting pot thing with Bond is they take a lot of these things and try and up them. There's a reason why Casino Royale was such a tonal shift, because they saw what happened with Jason Bourne. They knew they had to revitalize and reinvigorate the franchise, and they did.
Yeah, and I would say, like, usually, even though their influences are very obvious, you watch Octopussy and it's like, okay, they're doing Indiana Jones. Like, how do you not notice this? But usually they're pretty good. Like, it does keep it feeling fresh. The only times I think it really grates are Quantum of Solace, where it goes a little too Jason Bourne with its editing style. And I would say with Spectre doing the kind of Marvel, it's all connected thing, that didn't work out so well either. But beyond that, the other ones are very obvious. You can see the Dark Knight stuff in Skyfall. You can see the Moonraker Star Wars stuff. But like, I wouldn't say that it drags down the movies or makes the movies worse. I think if anything, it makes the movies more specific.
I would probably, I mean, if we're just going down that rabbit hole for a second, I would probably say that License to Kill leans a little bit too much on the 80s, like crime dramas and like Miami Vices and Lethal Weapons of the world.
Not seeing the problem.
Okay. All right. Conversation for another day there, Cam.
That's very noirish, actually, that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, License to Kill. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Now, one aspect of the film that did sort of sag for me, it's there's very little in this movie that I dislike, but the one bit that I felt was just a little bit over the top, I mean, not over the top, but just a little bit indulgent and leery, was the belly dancer stroke gypsy fight scene.
Yes.
Most of that just doesn't, I mean, the belly dancer is, she's stunning and she's very good at what she's doing. Good job. I couldn't do that. But it does feel a little bit OTT, self-indulgent, male gazy. And then you get to two women wrestling that it's just sort of like, what is happening in this moment?
This feels a little bit of that, like, we are a travelogue. We are taking audiences to places that are quote unquote foreign locales where weird things happen. And, now we are in a little more of a global world where we have an understanding of different cultures, and not the case here.
Yeah. I think your average British, certainly British cinema goer would have watched that and thought, wow, I'll never get to see anything like that in Peckham or somewhere similar. You know what I mean.
You might see something like that in Peckham.
Well, you might do in Peckham, yeah. But you know what I mean. That's what the films were always designed to do. Wanted to take you out of your. Certainly, the books were designed to take you out of your post World War II sort of slump and take you to exotic places that you might never see. Cam's right. Now we can see them and know more about them. It does look a little, and I always wonder why that's happening at all. Why do we go there? That's just to celebrate Bay surviving that explosion is the most I can make of it.
Well, it's interesting as well because it's one of those things that's in the book and it is transferred over. But the entire book isn't transferred, so there was obviously a conscious choice to remove and keep certain aspects. So they saw this scene in the book and thought, this is a good idea, folks. Let's have a belly dance. I would like to have been in the room when they made that decision, but again, we're applying the 2024 lens to a 1964.
We are definitely, we are definitely. And I'm not sure in the book. I'm not sure. I might be wrong on this, but again, don't write in. But I'm not sure that the fighting gypsies aren't naked in the book.
I think they were.
I think they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like
so. There's Fleming again,
But it gets like far weirder in that book because that stuff is problematic. But then there's all this stuff with Karen Bay in the book, and like a naked Roma woman that he kept like chained to a table, and you're just like, Ian Fleming, what was going on when you were writing that book? Like Jesus.
Yeah. Well, just sort of, writing to please himself, I think, for certain parts of it. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
I mean, there is a plot point in this whole gypsy fight business, isn't there? Which is not in the book, I don't think, but Grant protecting him.
Yeah.
That's a good moment. Yeah, I do like the leader of the Roma people who's just like, "Thank you."
Yeah,
and you hear that voice like
you can have both gypsies.
Like that guy's incredible.
Yeah.
Now, what is cool, the only redeeming moment in this whole scene is once the guns start going off, and I do really like the way Bond is moving through the crowd, and how he's taking people down. It's not that sort of, he's not the center of attention. He's not going after some big bad guy. He is just like slipping his way through and cutting people down in a very assassin-y way, and again, it shows that to me, it shows that cool ruthlessness that Bond is meant to have. So I do like that bit.
Well, you see him as a tactician, which you don't see as much. Like even like within the Connery era, by the time you get to like You Only Live Twice and Diamonds Are Forever, that stuff is out the window.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a damn shame.
Well, it gets to the stage, doesn't it, where he can't lose. Whatever situation he's in, he can't lose. So he doesn't need any tactics because he's going to survive it. Certainly going into the Moore period, that's how it always seems to pan out.
Yeah, and he would have died if Shaw hadn't, or Grant hadn't killed that guy. Bond would have died in that brawl.
And that's a really good point, Matt, that like Bond in this period where they don't know quite what a Bond movie is, the character doesn't feel like he knows he's going to survive. Whereas when you move forward in the franchise, Bond is like, he knows that he's kind of winking at the audience a little more so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you get to Honor Majesty's Secret Service and he's like, this never happened to the other guy.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They know. But I wanted to mention another thing about the femme fatale aspect, because obviously Tatiana is set up as the she's meant to be the Spider Woman, the one who's meant to seduce Bond and thwart the plans and help Spectre get their stuff. But it's interesting that it's kind of meant to be a Samson and Delilah parody. That's the typical femme fatale, right? But it's interesting that this thing sort of gets flipped on its head, where very quickly it's not so much about her trying to seduce Bond, but Bond more seducing her, because she very quickly wants to get out of this whole thing. Because what Bond doesn't know for a big chunk of the film is that she is being used by Spectre, but actually she wants out and away from Spectre. That's the kind of the big reveal that they eventually have. But I do like that. I like that it's, you know, she's just desperate to get out of a situation, and he's and she's not playing into that atypical kind of Bond girl who is going to, you know, stab him in the back. I do like that For Much With Love has that twist and gives the big bad to someone like Kleb, because I think it makes the character of Tatiana just a little bit more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I buy her love for Bond? No, but I buy her wanting to use Bond to get out of a bad situation. Absolutely. But I don't buy that they're in love. I don't know about you guys, but that's what's her only kind of flaw is I don't buy the I love you, James. James, I love you. Will you make love to me all the time in England?
I mean, that part is worth it just for when they are listening to it
Yes.
in the office. And Bond's like, well, you know, one time me and M, and M's like, turn it off. That part's worth it. But do I buy the love story? No. I think it's noteworthy, though, that like this is the second very like naive love interest he has, because you have Honey Rider in the first one as well, who's just kind of brought into this and has to learn on her feet. And that's kind of the same case here. And they would really change that with Pussy Galore in the next film, who's like the more mature person who can kind of meet Bond at his own level. I think the thing with like Tatiana is she's very iconic, but she's not a particularly great character. It's a little, as you said, a little too, you know, kind of like doe-eyed, like swept up in the romance of it all, but doesn't really contribute in the ways that are as interesting as even Honey Rider in the first film.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wish she could have been more. I wish she could have popped more, but she just it leaves me wanting a little bit. But what I do like is that Bond has the same girlfriend at the beginning of the movie as he does in the first one. It's an interesting bit of continuity that they retain that, and it's a little bit. Is it disappointing that she doesn't turn up again? Because that girlfriend doesn't return. I don't remember her returning in any of the other Connery movies.
No, she's never around again. I mean, for me, it's a shame, but I do understand the mechanics as to why she didn't come back.
Yeah.
And that's because as an audience, we would feel bad that Bond is sleeping around. If he's got a girlfriend at home, a steady girl, he's going steady with Sylvia. And then in Goldfinger, he's off shagging, I think, 3 different women. You'd be like, whoa, what about Sylvia? What are you doing? So they dropped it just purely so he can get some tail.
It's true.
Because I think the original idea was that she would be a recurring, you know, throughout the films.
I read somewhere that she signed a 3-film contract, but I don't know what book I read that in. I can't quote a source, unfortunately.
I would have.
I'm not so sure she would have worked necessarily.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe not.
You know, I think, you know, it might have been you can have too much of a good thing, sort of thing. And,
I mean,
I do like the bridge between the 2 films. I think she would, you know, as a link between the 2 films. So this is a direct sequel to Dr. No. I think that works, and I think she's good. She's good for that. You know, and it's a nice little sort of insight into Bond's private life that we don't get very much of throughout the whole franchise. You know, I always like to see more of that. But I think I agree with Scott. I think it's probably we would have started the more we get to know her, the more we would have started to hate him.
Yeah, and there's also I'm just trying to remember what the interaction between Bond and Moneypenny is in Dr. No, but that whole relationship gets more intense as it goes along as well. So a lot of the woman at home thing is more Moneypenny, but they never quite go there, so you never feel bad.
Yeah, and then what are you going to have? Sylvia Trench like catching the bouquet at Bond's wedding?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Awkward.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
It was never going to be a happy end for Sylvia, really, was it?
I mean, probably not. But I do like the attempt to. I don't know. There's a bit of, because we've talked about how Bond is quite ruthless in this movie and in these early movies, and you know he is more of that blood instrument that Fleming describes. It is interesting to me that he does have this. I don't know if do we call it a safety net? I don't know what it is, but he has this relationship, this connection that he can return to, and it does sort of add a human element to him that we don't get again because Noah now that's all gone. And he doesn't really have an impactful relationship, in my opinion, again until Tracy, and then after that, not again until Vesper. For me, the rest are all forgettable, really. So I don't know. I do think it could have been something they could have played with, even if she died in a later film. That could have been an interesting catalyst for him to do something. But then I guess we get that with Tracy and stuff. But I don't know. I like it. I think it would have been interesting if the films had continued to explore it.
If these movies were made nowadays, they would have paid Sylvia Trench off at some point. Like you'd see her with her husband somewhere, and they acknowledge each other in a scene or something like that in a later movie.
Yeah, she's dumped him.
Yeah, something like that. Something fun.
No, I think we should probably talk a little bit about Ali Karim Bey, the MI6 station head, right, in Istanbul. Fantastic actor. Pedro Armendariz was the man. Now, shockingly, I did not know this, but shockingly, during filming, he found out that he was dying. Found out he had cancer and he was dying. And basically, there was a conversation where it was like, well, we might need to recast you then. And he was like, no, please let this be my last film. And so watching the film, before I didn't know that, but when you watch the film and you know that, and you sort of watch his performance, you can see where they've replaced him with doubles, where they've needed to, but B, you can kind of see where he is physically struggling because of his illness. But I do think this character is he's a fun character. He brings a there's a jazziness to him that I love. I love him and Bond's interaction, and I also love that this isn't just kind of, this is 1963, but I like that Bond's kind of right hand person it's not just another white dude. It's not him and Felix. So I do give the film credit for one, having an interesting female villain, and then also having Bond's number two not be a white dude. But yeah, what's your guys' thoughts on our station master?
Well, rewatching this for this episode, I found myself enjoying Bond and Kerim Bey far more than I ever seem to enjoy Bond and Felix Leiter, I have to say.
Oh God, yeah.
I think he's a much better sidekick than Felix Leiter is. I'd like to have seen more of him. Obviously, for reasons you've gone into, that wasn't going to happen, unfortunately. But he's the ultimate Bond sidekick, isn't he?
What's the best Felix moment of the Connery era? Right?
Tumbleweed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
the best I can do for that, Cam, is it'll be something with Jack Lord, but I can't think what, because the others are really bad.
Yeah. So, is it Cease Linder in Goldfinger at the Fountain Blue, where he's been ogled by the ladies? That's probably my favorite moment there.
That's probably the best. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the reason why Kerim Bey, despite some of his perhaps flaws, is it works is purely because they imbue him with character and actual personality quirks. Like, he is a wanted man by the ladies. But you lay that on very thick at the start.
Back to the salt mines.
Oh yeah,
back to the salt mines. That was it.
But like he shows that he's got like a handle on Istanbul. He knows the spies back to front. He's got his secret passageways. That wasn't a pun. And he is just he's got it on lock, and you trust him implicitly straight away, and you trust that Bond is safe with him. And that's something that I think it imparts a sort of sense of like ease when you see him on screen, like a sort of a fatherly figure or like an uncle or something. You are protected in his presence.
Yeah, and I love the fact that all his cohorts are his sons.
Yeah, that's a nice touch, and I like that they kind of watered the character. I don't know, that's a negative term, but like they kind of took some of the edges off that character from the book, and I think in doing so made him, to quote himself, much more charming. Like he's a very fun, charming character, and there's a warmth to him. And we would see that Bond would often have these allies that were kind of on the border of the law. You think of like Draco in On Her Majesty's. But I don't think they ever did it quite as well as here. I think Columbo and For Your Eyes Only is very strong, but there's something about Karam Bey that like there's a reason he kind of set the standard for this kind of template. And I think a lot of it has to do with his death scene where he's killed. There's a tragedy to that. Like you actually feel for the loss of that character. And that's something that's, look, we don't necessarily go to Bond movies for like emotional moments to feel wounded when a character dies. Because often they're being inflated and exploding, things like that. But Karam Bey, there's like the acknowledgement of kind of even like Bond kind of going, oh, and you can see like he feels that kind of moment that they would finally go back to in scenes, I think, of really well with like the death of Mathis in Quantum of Solace. Not a great movie, but a great acknowledgement of the death of someone who is sort of that older figure in the field. I think they really nail that with Karam Bey.
Yeah, and they've taken time to build him up, haven't they? They've taken time. We're with him long enough to get to know him and to like him and to see something of who he is and what he's capable of. And that word charm, I mean, he's full of that. He's full of that. I love the bit where they've got the assassin tied up in the train carriage with a handkerchief in his mouth, and he says, "I think I'll tell you the story of my life. Would you like to hear it?" And the bullet goes, and he says, "Oh, you would, marvelous." And to go out on a gag, because the next time he's dead, to go out on a gag like that is brilliant and makes that death all the more sad, and has all the more impact, because it really is one of the Bond sidekick deaths that really does matter. A bit like Saunders in The Living Daylights.
Yeah,
I always think that's a good one as well. Just because of Saunders' character arc, because of the way that he realizes, Bond's actually not as bad as he thought he was in that business. But with Bey, this is the template for that sort of scene that when they do get it right, it does work well.
And I love the playful camaraderie they have in the field, because you have that little moment where they assassinate the guy who's coming out of the Call Me Buana poster.
Yeah.
And it's like the way he's got the gun, like he's basically putting it on the guy on his shoulder. Mm-hmm. And it's like this little back and forth. It's a tiny little moment that in the scheme of the larger movie doesn't really matter that much, but it tells us so much about the way these two guys kind of bounce off each other.
Yeah.
You've nailed it on the head, and you feel like they have a relationship. And I was thinking of Mathis the whole time. That's probably the next time we really get someone like that in the franchise. But it was also interesting to think of how many things in this movie go on to either be repeated or quite verbatim almost and reused in the franchise in general. It's interesting because this is still Bond. This is still the franchise finding its feet. But even with that, this is the film that, I mean, what was it? It was Spectre, right? That's the one. Yeah, they basically they imitate the Orient Express scene again. What's his face? I can't remember the Batista's character with the stupid silver metal thumbs.
Mr. Hinks, who never uses the thumbs. Yeah.
Yeah. He is Grant. Like that is, we mentioned that a little bit earlier, but there's all these things that there's something quite special about From Russia with Love that I think the franchise always wants to come back and pull from. You have your first sort of Blofeld scene, with the because Blofeld's not Dr. No, right? Am I misremembering? He's not Dr. No.
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 We all had a moment of like, is he or isn't he? Yeah.
I had to run through the film very quickly in my head there, but no.
Well, I guess technically he sort of is, because the actor who played Dr. Dent in Dr. No is the one who actually played Blofeld in From Russia with Love. So sort of halfway there.
Kind of. But I don't know. I just love that this film just seems to be the one that I love and hate at the same time, that so much is pulled and reused from this. But I think it just goes to show how special From Russia with Love is within the legacy of Bond. Pulling, because I mean, when we kind of, if you compare the Craig era, that arguably tries to go back and be far more noir than what was happening pretty much since Connery hung up, playing Bond, with a couple of blips here and there, with Dalton. So I don't know. I just find that quite fascinating. I suppose the ending is also another interesting aspect to this, because it's very different to the book as well, which is quite fun. So in the final scene, Tanya and Bond are in a hotel, and Kleb comes in dressed as a maid. She's going to try and steal the cryptograph and get out from Bond, but things don't go to plan, and there's a big fight. But Kleb is taken care of. However, in the book, it's different. In the book, Kleb actually stabs Bond with the poison knife. And that's how the book ends. There's no Bond waking up cured or anything like that. It ends with Bond dying.
Mm-hmm.
Which we don't, obviously they're not going to do that here. But I find that fascinating. The novel ends on a cliffhanger.
He got sick of doing it. He got sick of writing them. I think he was disappointed. I think that they weren't selling as well as he thought they should. So he just thought, what's the point?
Well, we say that, but he'd already written Dr. No, which was the next book.
Yeah.
So the sequel was coming, but it's interesting that in the book world he ended this on a cliffhanger of, is Bond going to die or not? It's the Sherlock Holmes thing. He could have stopped. He didn't have to turn in Dr. No, I suppose, but Dr. No was done and in the process of getting published.
It's also noteworthy to me, though, when you watch From Russia with Love and you have Rosa Klebb popping up at the very end. That's something that would be repeated many times, in Live and Let Die, in Diamonds Are Forever. They love to bring the villain back, often the henchman, as the surprise, bad guy in the last seconds of the movie.
Goldfinger.
And Goldfinger as well.
Goldfinger.
It's done so well here, though.
Less so in Goldfinger when Goldfinger gets sucked out of a plane window. I just think that's. I mean, it would actually happen that way. It's just it would be a lot grosser.
It looks amazing though. Honestly, I'm in favor of it.
It's interesting to me that it's Tanya that saves him.
Mm-hmm.
She's the one that does for the. We said earlier that Klebb is the big villain. The principal villain, and it's not Bond that gets to dispatch that principal villain. It's the love interest. It's
the love interest, but it's the damsel in distress. She rids herself of the dragon that is keeping her locked up in the.
That's
castle,
right.
basically.
Yeah.
And I do. This is where it's frustrating with this character of Tanya, because you could have been more iconic than what you are, because the ideas and the ingredients are there. It just wasn't, our character just wasn't cooked all the way. And I think, so I do like the fact that she is the one who does get to stop Klebb, given that Klebb was one who was, trapping her in this situation that she was desperate to get out of.
I think also she's a victim of the fact that her character is just written to be the damsel the whole way through. If you look at the films either side, Dr. No and Goldfinger, both their lead female protagonists have far more agency and are actually instrumental in both of the final plans in those films, whereas she's more just here as eye candy, or she's the honeypot. That she is part of that, but after that, she's basically just sort of set dressing for a while. Unfortunately,
We should also note too that like the actresses in Bond films early on, they were often just casting models. They didn't really care that much about performance because they dubbed them over. And so there's kind of that disconnect too, where you're not necessarily getting the full performance. But like, I think with what they're trying to do with her here, of her taking back her power at the end with Rosa Klebb, is done better in Thunderball, with Domino finally standing up to Largo and shooting him in the back with the arrow.
Yeah. And it's possible that because that was also directed by Terence Young as well. And maybe he learned from the mistakes, because the two screenwriters on From Russia with Love was Richard Maibaum. Hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Maibaum. Yeah.
And Johanna Harwood. Now Harwood has an adaptation credit, whereas Maibaum has the main screenwriting credit. But Johanna left the film because she was getting pissed off because Terence Young was constantly rewriting stuff. She apparently from what she's saying, she was trying to make the adaptation closer to the book, and I think it's probably why this is one of the first two, because this writing team also wrote on Dr. No. It's probably why these two films are quite unique, and also the two most similar to literary Bond, and then it goes very much different after this. She was interested in actually trying to adapt Fleming's novel as it is, with some changes here and there. But if you have your director constantly coming in and rewriting stuff, I can imagine that getting very frustrating. I mean, it would drive me nuts. I don't like being rewritten by other people. It drives me mad. So you can kind of see where maybe the character of Tanya could have been more realized had some of that not happened. Maybe we'll never know. But it's fun to speculate.
And it is certainly possible. It's certainly possible.
Yeah, and it's like you'd like to almost say like, well, it's the era. That's what happens. But then look at North by Northwest, the movie they're taking so much from, and look at Eva Marie Saint's character, who has like far more to do and more agency. And so it's like, no, it's a little more of just Bond as the male fantasy, take on that kind of material.
Yeah, very much so, I think. Very much so.
Yeah. Because again, I like the fact that the Bond, our hero, needs saving at the end. I mean, he's had two great scenes. He's had the helicopter scene, and he's had the epic boat chase scene with all the fire. That's great, but it is cool that this is your big hero, and the final moment is him needing to be rescued. It's an interesting. Is it a subversion of expectations? I don't know. What were people expecting at that time? But it's still exciting and different, and I like it.
But you're right, aren't you? Because he's had three, really, hasn't he? He's had the fight with Grant. He's had the helicopter. And he's had the boats. Perhaps he's a bit tired. You know what I mean? It might be a bit overkill if then he has a fight. He has a fight with Rosa Klebb. It's just a bit of spice to the mix. To have him need her rather than him being in control all the time. It adds to that more sort of vulnerable side of things.
Also, it would have looked really weird to have Connery was a pretty big, strong guy. Like to just suddenly have him throwing Rosa Klebb around a room. Yeah. Kind of like the audience like, well, this is not quite what I was hoping.
Even in 1963.
Yeah, I think like Lotte Lenya was like 5'1" or something like that. It would have looked a little strange.
Little tiny Klebb. It would be like a mini me being thrown around. In the Connery era, where do you rate From Russia with Love? I will just go out and say that this is Pete Connery Bond, easily my favorite of Connery's films, if not my favorite Bond, my number one Bond film of them all.
It's certainly my favorite Connery, without a shadow of a doubt. I think this is really the last time that he really does get close to the literary Bond for me, and the last time that he's as we've said earlier, a man who can be in a tight spot and not know if he's going to get out of it. You know, the Bond of Goldfinger becomes a bit too sort of superhero-ish for me, and then that just increases and increases. Is it my favorite Bond of all? Do you know, I could be persuaded that it is. I'm not 100%. I'm not as certain as you are, Luke. But of the Connerys, I would say this is absolutely the best one. Absolutely.
I think it's a tough question to answer because I think arguably it's Sean Connery's finest Bond film, but is it the one I would reach for first? I don't know. I think I would find myself maybe going for Goldfinger or You Only Live Twice or Never's Never Again before I reached for.
Oh, jeez.
I just listen. I'm on pain pills right now. No. I come to these Bond films a lot of the time for the escapist action, girls, guns, and gadgets of it all. Like I put my hands up to that. I'm not here necessarily for the Hitchcock Bond film or or some of the things you could label Dr. No with. And so, but I think this is Sean Connery's best performance as James Bond.
It's like weird because if you were to say like Roger Moore, I'd say his best performance and his best movie is The Spy Who Loved Me. Like that's easy to answer. And I think like I could do that for several of the Bonds, like I would say like Craig, it's Casino Royale for both answers. With Connery, it's actually split for me. I think his best movie is Goldfinger. That one is to me like Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's just like it's on rails. Everything's perfected. It just flies. But I would say my favorite performance from Connery is actually Dr. No. And it is actually the scene where he kills Professor Dent. You've had your six, and how cool he is in that movie. But that performance carries into this one. And so it's kind of like my favorite Connery performance period is Dr. No and From Russia with Love. So yeah, it's a little different with him.
I like that. I do like that.
Yeah,
I think that's good.
What makes that scene so good, I think he then does for close to 2 hours in this. So that's why it has the edge for me, really.
Again, just thinking about connective, not connective tissue, but like Bond, later Bonds, pulling ideas from early Bond. As we were mentioning the girlfriend scene at the very beginning, the clear connecting tissue. Moving from one film to the next, you can almost watch these quite seamlessly, which is very, very similar to what they do with the Craig era. That is definitely there between Casino and Quantum of Solace, and certainly there between Skyfall and Spectre and No Time to Die. But that's another little interesting little thing that I didn't really think about at the time. But yeah. Everything is, I guess Dr. No and From Russia with Love is the blueprint, isn't it? The blueprint for everything that comes afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case. Bond will always look back on itself and then also try to do what's current in that moment. It's always kind of a blend of these two things.
I will give Bond credit for being able to pull that off because some franchises cannot do that very well. Some have tried, some that I very much love, but have grown out of love with. Well, in some ways, but so I do have to give Bond even the clunkiness of the Craig era. I do have to give that credit for being able to pull a good majority of that off. I don't know about you guys. I don't know if you feel the same with that, but yeah.
No, you compare what Bond does to say what like Jurassic World is doing, Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, or the Star Wars franchise, where it's about strip mining the past, but not actually pushing forward in interesting ways. And I think Bond has always, because it's, run by Eon and the Broccoli family, they're a weird, group of people. They have their own unique tastes. They are not, a group of people around a table deciding what an audience wants. They are like, we are going to bring our own kind of odd sensibilities to this franchise. And because of that, it remains really consistent in terms of quality.
It does. Did you see that interview? Well, it was a red carpet interview with Barbara where someone cornered her and she's like, what's, who's the next James Bond going to be? And and Barbara just, she rolls her eyes. She turns her head away from the interviewer, rolls her eyes, and then comes back and gives a response that is nothing to do with what the woman just asked. And I'm not going to lie, I loved it. I was like, oh, I like the fact that you've just done that. Well done. Well done.
She's quite a sassy lady.
I remember it was before No Time to Die came out. Someone did a mock-up of a poster for Property of a Lady, which is one of the last Bond titles that hasn't been used as a movie. And so there was theories that might be the name of the final Craig film. And so someone made like a mock-up of a poster and bumped into her, I think at like a play or something, and got her to sign it. And she just wrote, "Nice try, Barbara Broccoli."
Oh, good work. Now, we're probably at the point where I think it's time to rate From Russia with Love. We've talked about, where we think about Connery, but this is more rating it as a movie, not as a Bond, not as Bond particular, but as a film. So what we do is, our system is we rate all of our films from 1 to 5 Falcons, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. So let's start with Scott. What would you rate From Russia with Love?
I don't think it's a full 5 Falcons. I'm not sure, especially because from my perspective, looking at this film and against sort of the film noir genre, if you say it's a genre in that sort of sense, I don't know how well that fits into some of the other films. So much as I think this is a very good James Bond film, I don't necessarily think this is a perfect film noir. So I would probably knock it down to about a 4. Going with 4. I'm stuck with 4. Okay. There's my 4. Right.
Cam?
I would actually go 4 as well, because I think just in terms of overall movies, like North by Northwest is a 5. If I'm just to look at something similar, like that is a pretty much flawless classic. From Russia with Love is a great entertainment, but is it a flawless classic? No, I wouldn't quite say so. So I would go with a 4.
Yeah, I'm going with a 4 as well. A strong, solid 4, because for part of the reason being what Cam said, I would also give North by Northwest a 5 without a shadow of a doubt, and it's not on that level. As a Bond film, I think it's one of the best, and certainly it's always been in the top 5. But there are just some things that I again agree with Scott that it's not quite as noir. If we're judging this as a noir film, there are bits of it that certainly are, the bits of it that aren't. But it's a great espionage film. But in terms of quality entertainment, I think it's a very solid 4 for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think if we're talking about we're judging this as a proper film noir, well, this would fall into neo noir in my opinion, because we're in the 60s, we're past the 50s when noir officially ended. So it plays with noir ideas. Bond is very much a noir figure in the way he operates, and as a sort of a lone figure who is never able to have proper relationships, never able to fall in love, all that sort of stuff. That all translates to the film, so I'm fine and cool with that. There are elements of playing with a femme fatale, and there are elements of light and shadow and interesting framing and blocking and stuff that does happen in this movie that I think is nicely noir, but there are problems. And like we said, Tanya's one. The gypsy fight scene is, the 2 women fighting is another awkward moment. So yeah, I can't give it 5. I can't give it 5, but I'm torn between sort of 5.5 and 4. But I think if I'm being honest with myself, it probably has to be 4. So I think we're 4 for 4 with From Russia with Love.
Yeah, and I just want to note that Matt did a brilliant job where he was talking about North by Northwest being a 5 without a shadow of a doubt, mentioning 2 Hitchcock titles, in one summation there of North by Northwest.
These things are all scripted, Cam. They're not really. They're not really. It was pure off the cuff.
Pure genius.
I didn't even know I'd done it. So there you go. That's how genius that was.
You need to throw in like just the word notorious, and you would have had 3.
Oh, there you go. Damn.
Next time. That's going to be a running competition now for me. I'm going to have to try and do that on each show now.
How many Hitchcock references can you get in one sentence? I like it.
Yes.
Cam, Scott, thank you so much for joining us on this investigation from Rush with Love.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We just said the same thing. Hey,
we did. That's why we're such a great team on Spy Hards.
Well,
why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Well, for spies, we're incredibly easy to find. Basically, wherever you get good podcasts, much like this one, you can find SpyHards, SpyHards. We also own the domain, and we own all the social media handles, so SpyHards, wherever you social media, you'll find us, sharing our particular brand of spy jinx, wherever we may go.
Fantastic. Go look them up. I love listening to your stuff, and I have your current episode, the Bond themes, lined up for this weekend. I'm very much interested to see where they rank for you. Where they rank is
there's some controversial choices in there for sure. We've already made some enemies with our choices.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
People write it in.
Oh, we've had like on social media, we've had like outraged, like how dare you? I put Lulu's Man with the Golden Gun down quite low, and apparently someone has unsubscribed to the podcast because of that. So I'm sorry to that person, but I just don't like that song. So.
I actually didn't tell Scott this, but I got a angry message from my sister, text message about Scott taking swipes at All Time High from Octopussy.
Oh, All Time High is not very good.
Oh, come on.
Yay!
That's one that I skip. That's a skip for me.
It's better as an instrumental. It's better as a classic, like the stringed instrumental.
I agree
about Lulu. Lulu is those lyrics, man.
Yeah, I am interested to see where you land with Quantum of Solace, the Jack White song.
Another Way to Die.
Another Way to Die. That don't tell me, but that's what I'm interested, because I quite like that one. I think it's pretty good. I know people hate it, but I really like it.
This is the thing. We've lost subscribers thanks to this episode, so we need more subscribers. So come and join us, folks.
There you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, well, I know what we think of Under the Mango Tree.
That's the best. Oh, well, I think that wraps everything up, guys. So we will end our investigation. We'll end our investigation there. Find SpyHards online, follow them, subscribe to their podcast, do the same to ours, leave reviews, all that kind of stuff. All the stuff I should have said at the beginning of the episode. I'm saying it now. Please do it.
Well, that wraps up our investigation. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with another case. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, and be sure to take care walking down those mean streets.